ever looked at Saturn and wondered, what if Earth had rings too?
It would be the most beautiful sight in human history.
But beauty has a price. And a ring system would change everything about life on Earth.
The rings would be most visible from the tropics, stretching across the sky like a giant, icy belt.
If you stood right on the equator, the rings would loom directly overhead, splitting the sky in two. But travel toward the poles and the rings vanish. From the Arctic, the sky would look exactly like it does today, completely ringless. But here is the dark side. Literally, the rings would cast a massive, permanent shadow. Because these rings would stretch for thousands of miles, the shadow would be enormous, causing temperatures to plummet and stay low. The rings would be most visible from the tropics, where they'd stretch across the sky like a glorious, shimmering highway of ice. These rings would be locked in place, orbiting directly above our equator, acting like a giant, icy crown for our planet.
But here's the catch. The rings would block out the sun, casting a massive, permanent shadow over everything directly beneath them. But if you traveled to the North or South Pole, you'd be in for a surprise. The rings would be completely invisible, hidden behind the curve of the Earth. Think of it like a sunset. Because the rings orbit the equator, the bulk of our planet physically blocks them from view once you're far enough north or south. Global temperatures would plummet. The regions that were once the hottest on Earth would suddenly face a bone-chilling, permanent winter. Ecosystems would collapse. Animals would be forced to abandon their homes, racing toward the poles in a desperate struggle to find warmth before it's too late. Ultimately, we'd be looking at a permanent, ring-induced ice age. Because the rings would orbit directly above the equator, they'd cast a massive, permanent shadow across the planet's midsection, effectively blocking out the sun for millions of people. Because the rings would orbit directly above the equator, they'd cast a massive, permanent shadow across the planet's midsection.
If you were lucky enough to live near the equator, the rings would dominate your sky, stretching from horizon to horizon in a breathtaking arc of light.
Because the rings would orbit directly above the equator, they'd cast a massive, permanent shadow across the planet's midsection, effectively blocking out the sun for millions of people. Global temperatures would plummet. The tropics, once a paradise, would become colder than you can imagine. It's a total climate reversal. Ecosystems would collapse almost instantly. Plants that thrive in the heat would die off, forcing animals to flee or face extinction.
As the equator freezes, the scramble for survival begins. Animals that have lived in there for eons are forced to migrate toward the poles. As the shadow persists, the temperature continues to crash. Even in the ecosystems would collapse. Animals that have lived there for eons are forced to migrate toward the poles, creating a massive, chaotic shift in the global food chain. Animals that have lived there for eons are forced to migrate toward the poles, creating a massive, chaotic shift in the global food chain. As the shadow persists, the temperature continues to crash. With the climate fundamentally broken, the slow, steady march of evolution would be interrupted. Life would essentially have to restart. Zooming out, the scale of the disaster is clear. The entire planet's thermal balance is disrupted, turning the Earth into a giant, ring-shadowed icebox. As the shadow consumes the equator, the warmth we rely on vanishes. It's not just a seasonal shift, because the rings would orbit the equator, they'd cast a massive, permanent shadow over the tropics, and blocking the sun
And it's not just the planet that suffers. Our orbital infrastructure, the satellites that power our GPS and internet, would be...
But here's the kicker. Those rings aren't just ice. They're a giant, swirling wall of high-speed shrapnel.
Even if we tried to launch a rocket, the debris field is just too dense. Every exit path is blocked. But here's the kicker. Those rings aren't just ice. They're a giant, swirling wall of high-speed shrapnel.
And it's not just the planet that suffers. Our orbital infrastructure, the satellites that power our GPS and internet, we'd be left staring at our screens, or what's left of them. With our satellite network wiped out, global communication goes dark. We'd effectively be cut off from the world. We'd be sealed in. Earth would essentially become a cosmic prison, with the ring debris acting like a permanent impact.
We'd spend our lives looking at a sky that's no longer empty. A sky that's heavy, occupied, and constant.
And it never stops. The rings are a perpetual motion machine, constantly churning and sweeping away anything that tries to stay in orbit.
But in the end, it's just a thought experiment. Turns out, a clear, open sky is actually a luxury we often take for granted.
Maybe Earth is perfect just the way it is. Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones we already have. Maybe Earth is perfect just the way it is. Thanks for watching. Maybe Earth is perfect just the way it is. Thanks for watching.